Okay, great. We are live on YouTube, and that short delay actually gave us a little bit more time for a few more members of this group to join. So thank you for bearing with me here. Today is June 17th, and the time is 12:05 p.m. and I will call this meeting to order. So this is the second iteration of the Grand County Economic Development Advisory Board. And my name is Zachariah Levine. I am the chair of the committee. Because we have a few individuals who are with us today that were not at the last meeting, our first meeting, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick round of introductions. How about just name and agency representation if you have any. And many folks are on mute, so please let me know if you have any trouble unmuting yourselves. Looks like somebody's available now. So, you know, as I did last time, why don't I go ahead and call out folks just to keep this moving in an orderly fashion. And I'll go based on what I'm looking at in my Zoom screen. So Kelly Thornton.
I'm Kelly Thornton. I'm with the Department of Workforce Services, the Workforce Development Division. I manage the offices in Moab and Blanding.
Great. And Elaine?
Elaine's on mute.
You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. We can hear you now.
Your audio is not clear, Elaine.
Well, I'm going to ask everyone that, well, if you're not talking, to just stay on mute. We'll see if that fixes the echo. Otherwise, Elaine, it may be the case that you have multiple audio devices connected here. And I'm guessing that's probably your 1372 number. You might need to turn your computer audio to mute so that you're just using the phone. Okay, Rob Walker.
Private citizen.
And Dane.
Yeah, Dane Brewer with Sacred Earth One LLC, and we provide private commercial loans to Grand and San Juan counties.
Great, thanks, Dane. And you know, I'll take this opportunity right now to let everyone know that we have some guests with us today. Dane being one of them. You know, he won't be a guest, quote unquote, going forward. But as it turns out, we had a parallel group tracking this one. Many of you have served on the Economic Resilience Task Force that is part of the coronavirus response task force headed up by the city and the county leadership, as well as Moab Regional Hospital. Many of the folks that are on that group have been contributing to the economic development arena in Grand County for some time now. And although not every member of that group was appointed to be part of this official advisory group by the county council, I want to be as inclusive as possible and try to bring in as much you know, experience and contribution as possible. And so there are several individuals in the community that have a lot to offer, even if they're not officially on this group. So, you know, while our bylaws don't have any specific mention of ex officio members, there's nothing that prohibits us from having members of the public participate in the conversation. So for now, you know, as we're getting going, I want to make sure that we bring in those voices. So Dane Brewer is an example of one of those individuals, and some of the others that are here with us today will also fit that category. So with that said, Brad. would you like to introduce yourself?
Brad Bertosh, and I owe Dane Brewer a phone call. I promised I'd call him like last week. I'll get around to it, Dane. I apologize. I'm a longtime economic development guy with an venture accelerator called venturecapital.org. Recently retired, spend a lot of my time in Moab, do some angel investing as well as helping people that need businesses that need to be pointed in the direction of capital.
Great. And Caitlin?
I'm Caitlin Myers. I'm the Senior Project Manager for the City of Moab, participating to provide some staff representation for the city in this conversation, but also because I was involved with a lot of the groundwork for, especially some of the items that we'll be talking about today with my time for the county. So just here as a participant in those conversations.
Great, thank you. And we don't have Emily here with us today, who is the official city rep. So hopefully you can pass on any takeaways to her. Olivia? You are on mute.
I'm Olivia Holmes. I'm the Grand County AmeriCorps Vista at the in the Community Economic Development Office.
Great, thanks. And Sheik?
Sheik Khan, private citizen and business owner in Moab.
Thanks. Lacey?
I'm Lacey Shumway. I'm the executive director of the Moab Chamber of Commerce.
Great. And Leanna?
I'm Leanna Etchberger. I'm the Associate Vice President of the USU Moab campus here in town.
Thank you. And Lonnie Campbell? Lonnie, if you're trying to speak, you're on mute. I'm going to hold off. If you want to rejoin the conversation at any point, we'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourself then. If for those of you that don't know Lonnie, he is a commercial banker at Zions Bank in Moab. And Jasmine Duncan is also with us today. Jasmine is the mayor of the town of Castle Valley. She also works for Sellers Group, which is a property management company. They manage, I think, mostly affordable housing developments, and in the Moab area, she manages the Cinema Court project. And Jasmine is not using a computer with a microphone today. Jasmine, I'll let you know that you can join the conversation via phone by using the call-in information on the agenda and in the invite, if you would like to join us via audio. I also trust that you will let me know via the chat box if there's anything that I goofed on your introduction, or if you don't join the audio and you want to add something. So, and I see Lonnie is back with us. Lonnie, I introduced you as the commercial banker for Zions Bank. If you want to add anything to that, now's your chance.
No, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I do all the
Okay.
commercial banking here, so.
Okay, great. Well, so let's move through our agenda. The first part, because this is an advisory body that is subject to Utah's Public Meeting, Open Meetings Act, we have to have some items on our agenda just to meet and comply with state code. I'm going to ask if there are any conflicts of interest, disclosures, ex parte communication that anyone needs to communicate at this point. Okay. Do we have any citizens to be heard? So this would be for items not on the agenda. And for those of you that aren't part of the group but anticipate participating in the conversation, you don't need to speak now. Okay, great. And first order of business is the approval of minutes. So Rob Walker and I collaborated on the first iteration of meeting minutes and sent those out. Rob sent those out to the group. And so now is the opportunity to make a motion to approve the minutes. And if there's a second, there can be discussion. That can also be the time. For those of you not as familiar with Robert's rules, if there are changes to the minutes, that is also the time when you can bring up any discussion or questions about the content that you saw in there. You don't have to wait until that point either. It's also fine to raise issues before a motion is made.
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, Rob has made a motion to approve the minutes. Do we have a second?
I'll
I think I
second.
see Elaine. Thumbs up. Okay, any discussion? Okay, seeing no discussion, I'd call for a vote. And just for simplicity, I will just ask that if you are opposed, please speak now, and otherwise I will take your silence to indicate a positive vote. Okay, seeing no opposition, I will assume that the vote is unanimous. And let's just double check that we have a commission here, or a quorum here, and we do. So we're good. We can officially approve the meeting and or the meeting minutes and keep moving forward. So moving into the bulk of our agenda, review and discussion of the draft Moab Area Economic Development Plan, which is cheekily titled the More Than a Playground. And then the next discussion item will be a continuation of our discussion last week about community and economic priorities and a generation of initial ideas for funding requests to the Rural County Grant Program. And I will note that they are in this order because I anticipated the bulk of our conversation being on the second discussion item, but I think it's reasonable for both of these discussion items to be blended. So I want to thank Elaine for doing her homework and reading through the draft plan. I didn't get email comments from anyone else, so I'm not sure if others had the opportunity to read through the draft plan, but I would open up for discussion, just some initial reactions to that plan. And I have some questions from Elaine and the email that she sent out to the group, and we can go through those as well. I just, from my perspective, I want to really clarify that there's a lot of work to be done on the plan. There's no doubt about that. But for today's purpose and just given the urgency of getting an application into the Rural County Grant Program, I want to try to just use the draft plan as really the launching pad for that funding application. It's really provided to you to give you a sense of what our office has been using as our rough guideline for economic development work, rather than spending all of today, trying to update the plan, for instance. So with that, I'd open it up to the group. Anyone want to start us off?
I'll be happy to. I finished the plan, and it was an amazing job of all the stuff that you put together, and there's clearly a lot of work involved, a lot of things that need to be done. And because of that, I think that some of the individual items need to be discussed as to what's the most important. And we need to put in some priorities and timelines as to what can be aggressively accomplished in the short term, intermediate term, and longer term setting. Some of the things that need to be done are going to need some legislative approval. They're going to need some GOED repositioning some monies. And the trick is just to sort of put it together so that we can not have a long-term thing that needs to be funded, block some short-term gains that we need to do. So I think that if we can kind of put it down into a couple of big buckets that we need to, and how we can put down for the purpose of the grant, what we think success is and what a timeline is would be real helpful.
Okay. Leanna?
I just wanted to ask, because this was, done a while ago, and you had talked about, you guys had been visiting it again, if there were any updates or changes that you would like to mention, that, I'm just saying that because you had mentioned this last time that you'd been revisiting it.
Sure. I'll put that down and then we can come back to that. Any other sort of initial reactions?
I agree with Leanna's comment. This COVID thing has caused just a nightmare. And so it may really drive our thinking for the next 6 months. And updated data would be good. Where appropriate.
Zachary, I think my initial feedback around the application process and putting some, some meat behind that is you've done a fantastic job outlining the primary economics, the secondary economics or industries, and really looking at the tertiary industries to kind of scale that or uplift that into the secondary industry, right? Path forward in how to improve those tertiary industries in Grand County was just my 2 cents on that particular slide.
Okay.
Another aspect was the conversation that I think Emily brought up about the realities of transplanting and rooting in Moab. I think a couple of the discussion items were, why aren't people transplanting here? And I think that would be a great discussion topic for later on in this with this group.
Thank you for bringing that up and continuing some of the threads from last week. I think that is a critical component and goes into, what would often be called a SWOT analysis, or looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so, what that's really getting at is the weaknesses component of our attractiveness as a place to live and do business.
No, I think that's very important, because I think that one of the shorter term things that can be done is how do we attract the online worker and start it with government, for example. And what are the primary drivers to get people to want to stay here? There'll be people that want to be here because they want to be here, but that's going to be very few. Can we expand that to get people that want to be here and also want to be able to raise a family or do a few other things? And are there certain things that we need to address to make those happen?
I'd like to see some kind of beefed up commitment to working with people who already live here. I mean, I know it's a component, but there's a lot of talent here, whether people recognize it or not. And those are people who are already committed to this lifestyle, this community. And I think things like what Brad's talking about in terms of government jobs, there are government jobs probably that could be done from here. Well, I know this actually, DWS is hiring statewide currently. That could happen from this location, and people who live here could take advantage of those jobs as they move through their career. So I'd like to see some more conversation about that and some more kind of language and commitment in the plan.
I think that one of the things that's very important, and I'm going to let Leanna speak, that the community is based on tourism, and you can't just walk away from that. I mean, there's just no way. It is a big deal, and it's a big deal for the state. Moab's tourism is. And so to Kelly's point, we've got to deal with what's here and try to keep that a vital component. But from a sustainability standpoint over the long haul, how can we diversify?
Yeah, I was gonna say sort of, I knew that I was gonna say Kelly and I probably have a very similar perspective in that, you know, we need to grow our own. We have a lot of people here. I mean, there's a lot of people who are out of work, which is a problem. And so if we can put those people that are here that have that talent and fill it, we're going to be solving multiple problems at the same time. So I think that that should be really essential. I agree.
Okay. Any other sort of opening thoughts or overarching reactions? Let me check the chat window to make sure not missing anyone here. Okay. Okay. I would also add, you know, just right off the top of my head, that in an issue that continues to surface for us as a community and is brought to my office's attention time and time again is childcare, and how much of an impediment it is to many families who are here that are trying to have dual income households, and the lack of availability, the cost, and the flip side of that being the amount of economic opportunity that exists within that if the right pieces are put in place. So on the provider side, and there are challenges associated with that being a viable economic opportunity for providers and the employees of those providers. But kind of like housing and housing availability and affordability, it's not often an element that we think of right off the top of our, you know, it's not like an immediate reaction that we think of as being a critical input for economic development and diversification, but it is brought up to our office time and time again. And I've got an email from Emily Campbell and Caitlin Thomas, who are working with a recently formed group that is looking specifically at childcare. And so I want to highlight that for our group as being an important piece of not just the plan, but also the possibility of it being a major element of the rural county grant application. So want to bring that up, and I'll leave it at that for now. We'll get into some of these other items as we go forward.
Zachariah?
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point. One of the things that really came out to me when I was reading through the plan was the level of income compared to others, the rest of the state, et cetera, but especially as it related to housing and how much money they could make to afford housing and make that work. One of the things maybe that makes a lot of sense is if you looked at it from maybe not so much the individual worker standpoint, but maybe there's also a component we should look at from households. And if there's households, so you have a 2 income, you can increase the 2 incomes of the households, you know, by adding the second income or increasing the quality of income. And childcare will help do that. That is really an important point to help people move forward.
Yeah, well, and at a very practical level, if a major segment of our population is unable to participate in the labor force because they don't have any other options but to stay home and raise their children, then you know, we are unnecessarily excluding that segment of the population and all the contributions that they can offer. And that could be male or female. I don't want to suggest.
And the key is affordable childcare.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And because, you know, people do it all the time when they look at how much childcare costs and what they can earn.
Right.
They opt not to do childcare.
Right.
And if you can get a better job and you can have affordable childcare, then you can start really driving a better, more income into the household.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can I add something to that as well?
Please.
I think there's an interesting component with that is tying the childcare component with the school system as well. You know, is there a way economically for our education system, K through 12, being able to support after school programs? We have a handful, we do have that, but is there a way for them to adopt some sort of childcare program that is affordable, that is also supplemented from the state potentially, or by grants?
Excellent.
So
there's funding available through Workforce Services, our Office of Childcare, and they actually heavily subsidize the existing after-school programs. But there also was some work done toward from the school district toward preschool. And since that happened, we have a new superintendent, and we have Mallory, who is really working on it, is now working for the county. But I think they were open to it. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that Taryn will need to get her feet under her a bit, but I think that's something they were interested in. They were more interested in the preschool aspect than the childcare aspect, which is sort of an important,
I would say
important thing, because that's the hours that you need, rather than sort of the Head Start model, which is shorter. But I think there's potential.
I don't think that's necessarily separate, because I think when we talk about childcare, I think you can also rephrase that and really talk about education and continuing education or after school education as a component. And having those educational blocks where it's kind of customized, or being flexible enough to be able to tailor to the parents' schedules, especially in a hospitality or a tourism economy, those schedules can vary extremely.
Yeah, that's been a point that has been raised with our office, is that you know, in our community in particular, just your standard 9 to 5 childcare doesn't
work.
It isn't adequate, because people work irregular hours and irregular days, and so having flexibility in our childcare offerings is also a critical component. In my conversations, just one second, Robin, I'll come to you next, and I think Kelly wanted to talk as well, and then I want to zoom back out from the childcare issue. But in my conversations with Caitlin and Emily, really the issue boils down to about 3 things. It's the physical infrastructure, so the real estate, and added into that the licensure. That's been a big challenge. Secondly, it's the wages that childcare providers can earn. So where there has been an accommodation of a childcare space, the entities that have put that together have had extreme trouble finding qualified employees because of the wages. And so then that's the third part, is that the wages are low, and so the employee base for that type of work just hasn't been sufficient. And so that sort of triad of issues has really been detrimental to expanding childcare opportunities here. And so you know, that's what they've said we need to really be focused on, is how to find solutions that address each one of those components, but simultaneously. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I just want to move us along. I just think that we're kind of like preaching to the choir here about childcare being important to our community. I think we all know that. At some point when we get money in this fund, we can look to spend it on childcare. I think we should move on to assessing, our buckets for our initial application or specific things for that bucket, just because there's a lot of things that we could be talking about for hours and hours. And so if we want action, I think let's get that $200,000 application in. And to do that, Zachariah, let us know how much detail you need, whether we need to start voting or prioritizing some of the different buckets, or we need to or give a few different ideas under each bucket.
Sure. Do you want just a quick update of the action plan that we've got in the draft ED plan, or does the group want to immediately shift to this conversation about buckets in an application?
So there's some kind of soft deadline, is that right?
The soft deadline is Friday, but GOED has been very clear that they don't expect that many counties to meet that deadline, and it's not, it's really intended to motivate counties to submit so that they can get the money as quickly as possible.
So the Governor's Rural Partnership Board's meeting next week, is that right? So are they looking at some of the proposals next week? Do you know, Zachariah? Or
I don't know if they've set their agenda for that meeting. I haven't seen it yet, and so yeah, my
maybe August. Yeah,
my suspicion is that it would be July, and then we could get the money, end of July, beginning of August. But I also have no problem with this group, really coalescing around some initial buckets and trying to get something in by Friday. So at the risk of cutting short the discussion of the draft plan, why don't we move to the next discussion item then, and we can always reference back the plan, which again has not been adopted, and to answer one of Elaine's questions, does not have a timeline that's strictly based on like dates, because as you can see, it's got short range, mid range, long range, but there isn't necessarily, because this hasn't been adopted, there's no year associated with that. So the short range and mid range isn't like 2016 to 2018 or 2017 to 2019. It was really a framework for when this plan gets adopted, what should we have in the 0 to 2 year box. But I can say that many of the short range actions have actually been accomplished, some with more success than others. I would say the last 5 bullet points, I can confidently say have been checked off. We've done a tremendous amount of work in housing policy making. We've got great partnerships with UDOT. There's a lot of infrastructure work happening with UDOT right now, even planning work that's continuing with them. The Moab Art Trails project program is up and running. We've got a new wastewater treatment plant. The airport has been expanded. It's got other projects ongoing. I think there's probably an interesting component related to the airport, given COVID and tourism here. But I would say, we're probably really looking at, as a group, more of the mid-range items and the cluster development notion for diversification. That's my take on it. I want to get Elaine's questions answered as well, because I think they were spot on and thoughtful. And so if we don't get to them today, then I will respond via email, Elaine, to you and to the group. Yeah. But given the time and I like Rob's suggestion, if we want to pivot to the grant, I'll just go ahead and start that I think, a handful of items that deserve consideration are the following. The creation of a co-working space. And I've got a cost estimate for a project that we were looking at with Wabi Sabi to expand their existing facility to accommodate a co-working space in downtown Moab. I think that the business summit is definitely worthy of consideration, or at least, if we can't have the business summit as it's been conceived in the last few years, strong consideration for training and education for the business community. I would like childcare to be in the mix, to consider putting some money towards that. And then I would also really like to support the Grand Area Innovation Network with a pot of money that can be used as seed money, or whether it's in the form of a grant or a revolving loan fund. I'd really like some money to support entrepreneurship in this community. And then lastly, I think that there should be some money for administrative costs, not an inordinate amount or disproportionate amount, but given the city and county's financial situations, I just think that it's going to be important to put some money towards economic development, and I don't know that it's going to be there in either general fund. So those are my initial thoughts. Those are a little bit more project specific than bucket oriented, as you've seen in our prior business expansion and retention grant applications. But I'd like to open it up to the rest of the group to try to move us from just some initial ideas to details. Go ahead, Rob.
Can you just give us cost estimates for each of those?
Well, the co-working space, so the interesting thing about the co-working space is that there is a separate funding program at the state called the Rural Co-working Infrastructure Grant, something like that. And we could apply for that. And the reason I bring it up is because the cost estimate that we have for the remodel at Wabi Sabi is $370,000. I know that seems excessive to you, Rob, but that's the estimate that we have, and it's a very high quality redesign of the building and the space. So the $200,000 available in this rural county grant program isn't enough to cover that, but perhaps we could leverage both programs. And then,
the other program, how much we could get for that?
I believe it is, let's keep going. I'll come back to that. I think it's $500,000.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that, okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, if we can get, I'm all for a co-working space. I feel very strongly that is too much money to spend on one. Yeah. But if we're going to get most of that money from the state anyways, it'd be great to have a co-working space in Moab. So I'm all for that. But that's the kind of thing where you can't build one half a co-working space,
Correct.
but you can take on childcare. You can take on some of these other things with smaller investments.
Correct.
What is the, why don't you continue on? What is the business summit cost, and what are you thinking in terms of administrative costs and that you could, because I'm all for that. I think that makes a lot of sense right now, given your issues. And, but I imagine that maybe the grant is not designed for that. So maybe they have limits around that.
Well, the grant does contemplate money being available for staff costs, because they know that many rural counties don't have the the budget available to adequately staff their economic development efforts. The business summit in years past, we've planned for anywhere between $20,000 and $40,000. As it grows, it becomes more expensive to operate. The higher the quality, I think the higher the cost. And we try to, one of the reasons why it's so expensive is that we try to keep the registration costs at a minimum to include as many business representatives as possible. And I think that we found a nice balance in that. And then with respect to administrative costs for staff, that is a good question. I suppose now is as good a time as any to let all of you know that if you haven't heard already, I actually formally resigned yesterday from my post as the Community and Economic Development Director. So effective August 7th, I will no longer hold this position. I've accepted a job with the Synergy Company as their Director of Corporate Development and Corporate Social Responsibility. I intend to remain very involved with planning efforts, and with the County Council's blessing, I'd like to continue chairing this group. My job with the Synergy Company will involve a lot of outward-facing and community engagement work, and the Synergy Company is really committed to fostering innovation and diversification of our economy and wants to be more involved. So all that's to say that I don't know exactly what the County Council will choose to do with the economic development staffing in the county. But if I were to just throw out a number, I would think $50,000 would go a long way for staffing economic development. But I don't have a good answer for that, or a more refined answer to that today. I don't have good numbers on childcare either.
Well, childcare is interesting. Well, the good thing about childcare is it's currently happening in Moab, right? So if we wanted to help make it more affordable.
Not happening in Moab, Rob, I think is the point.
What?
Yeah.
There's no childcare in Moab at all?
To illustrate the issue for you, there was a recent study conducted that showed we have 12 spots total for children ages 0 to 2. And each year there are roughly 100 babies born in Moab. So, just a gross estimate of 200 babies or infants that could need childcare at any given time. And there are only 12 spots available. And it doesn't improve markedly the older they get.
So right now there's like one childcare facility in town?
There are a handful of in-home providers in town, and basically two, as far as I can tell, two like larger facilities.
Well, I guess what I was getting at was that's the kind of thing that you can incentivize in small ways. I mean, in incremental ways. Like for instance, you can have a plan that will support someone becoming a child care worker, where you can subsidize their income, you could subsidize the cost of child care, on a per person basis. So we could take a pot of money. And go ahead, Caitlin.
I was just going to say that there has been, and I don't know if they're still meeting or not, but I know over the last few years, there's been a group that's been working on this and developing kind of a nonprofit to do scattered site childcare. So partnering with businesses and helping kind of remodel a section of their office space. Just going back to Zachariah's point about the issues with childcare, the licensing requirements for childcare are really restrictive. And so that's part of the reason why they're talking about doing it scattered site, is because they can have one provider for, you need a certain amount of square footage per child, and then also a certain number of staff per child. I think it's like for 0 to 2, it's like 1 person per 2 children. So that's really hard to staff. So in terms of childcare, I mean, I would encourage this group to reach out to some of the people that are actually working on trying to provide childcare and see what would be most useful, whether it's supporting their programming or providing specific training resources or something like that.
I agree with Caitlin on that, is reaching out to the existing organizations that's been working on it for years and seeing if there's any type of economic need or a grant need within the organizations to help establish that as a short-term action item.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the things you don't want to do in any of this is reinvent the wheel and compete. This is all about cooperation. And I think I would see some of the money in one of the buckets, Zachariah, be used to develop the partnerships that you need to develop, that the community needs to develop with various organizations, whether it's EDC Utah, whether it's SBDC, whether it's organizations such as that you can help sponsor seminars, you can help work with them to get more exposure and work a better economic development program by having them be a partner rather than trying to compete. And whenever you can combine people together and resources together, you can do much better, as you know, in getting things done. And I think Moab, because of the small amount of money we've got to look at partnering. And so I think a piece of this in the core budget, as opposed to the 600,000 that's coming down, should allow the economic development staff to build some good solid strategic alliances with key organizations. And that takes staff time. I mean, it just takes time. It may not take any money to give to somebody or to put up as a sponsorship or to buy a membership. It might, but it does take staff time to build those relationships and implement them so they work for you.
Yeah, and we can kind of do that too, I would think. You know, us members, we could kind of, we know a lot of people in town, and we can, you know, I agree with you that a lot of this is, yeah. So I think that the bucket for, I mean, to me, it seems like the administrative bucket makes a lot of sense to support, you know, that department. The business summit to me makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
You know, the cost doesn't seem unreasonable, you know, for the amount of people that are there. It's like 200 people there probably or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, isn't the summit already pre-funded, or is that, I guess it's a question, is it pre-funded or is that an ongoing budgetary, I guess, development that you have to do on an annual basis?
We are not yet at the point where it is self-funded.
Where it's actually bringing in money as opposed to costing money.
Yeah, we have, you know, we're definitely at the point where we're, you know, carrying over some money from year to year to help with the initial planning and the initial investments of advertising and, you know, space rental and catering and, you know, some of those contracts that are just kind of fixed costs, but it is definitely not financially, you know, solvent on its own right now.
Zachary, too, in the past, wasn't that largely supported by the Bear Grant, which this is now replacing?
Correct. Yeah. So all the funding for it in the past has been from the Bear Grant.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Just one thing to throw out there, as we're talking about when we look at economics as far as cash and dollars spent, there's some figures out there as far as the appropriations committees use when they're spending tax dollars is they equate government or funding spending that's at about $103,000 to create a full-time job. Is there anything that we can spend these smaller pots of money to accelerate the spending of other monies to create, you know, full-time jobs? I think that's something to just kind of think about.
Well, I think that goes back to making sure we have money for the current economic infrastructure, which is tourism,
Yep.
and help get those things done. So I think that money for helping existing businesses for the tourism angle to make sure that we get that up and as rapidly as we can. I don't know if it's ever going to rebound quickly. But there's excitement about coming back to Moab. I mean, I come down there and I was surprised at how many people were there the end of May, 1st of June.
Yeah, and we're still down about 50% overall,
Yeah.
I think, currently, but
you could get that up to 75% by the end of the year. That'd be great, right?
That'd be awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, so just thought I had, so I think we've got a number of things already that could take up most of the money very easily. I think that, which I'm, kind of for those items being a large portion. However, I think it might increase our chances to get the extra $600,000 if we add a number of other items as sort of like proof of concept things, where we have a small amount of money, for instance, for like scholarships, for things like, reimbursing someone for individual training or something. So that way, if they do well and we run out of money there, we can then go back and say, hey, look, we did this, we had good success there, we want more money to make more of a gain, rather than just something out of the blue and I think that'll be easier to get someone to say yes to it.
Liana, on just to piggyback off of Rob's comments, is there any current programs that could use that type of support with USU and remote learning and distance learning?
Well, interestingly, USU Extension has a really good award-winning remote worker program, and then remote worker employer kind of, training. And so that's free, right? So that's out there. Then we have all our career and technical education. There's some business things. There's also part of the small business development is the custom fit. And so there's STIT money, which I don't remember what that stands for, but people can apply to get half of their training that is required for their businesses. So for example, a masseuse has to go keep their license up by getting this ongoing training. And so if that training is required, then they can get some money back for that. So supplementing some of that funding, providing outright scholarships for people to learn new skills. And then there's always that that remote worker training, which is really cool. So for example, if somebody came to USU and learned how to do web design or learned how to do medical transcribing or something like that, then they can work at home and they can take this free course to be really good at it. It gives them a sort of a little credential to find jobs elsewhere. And I'm sure Kelly has a lot more that she can add to this, but I think that that's something that we're kind of going on the right track there, where we have people that are in a bad way, right? And they need new skills, or they need skills, just kids who stay here after high school, whatever. So there's a lot we can do, especially if we can supplement that, and pool resources that way. Kelly, do you have anything to add to that?
We have funding for people based on eligibility, and almost everyone who applies is eligible. That helps with that. I think the component that's missing is the opportunity and the sort of direction where we're going. I think USU opening up CTE programming is going to be that's going to make a huge difference in terms of people being able to access skill.
And if I can add to that too, finally, we actually are legit tech college, right? And so we are instead of charging USU tuition, right? We're charging like the same as every other tech college, reasonable prices for, hourly hours, however long it takes to get particular credentials. So
that's huge.
Hey, Kelly and Liana, what's the enrollment rate currently, and has that been tracking up? And can these grant monies that we're talking about help accelerate that, from both of you guys?
Kelly, you start, because this is brand new for us and I don't have a lot of gut reactions.
in terms of our enrollment, with the funding that we would use to send people to classes or whatever, we use a lot of it to help people find jobs, because currently there haven't been a ton of programs that we can support locally at USU. So the difference between my Moab office and my Blanding office is pretty huge. But with the change in CTE and shorter term programming, I anticipate that that'll really go up. We have several people that we're working with, but most of them are not attending classes, or if they are, they're going somewhere else for it because of the limitations that have been in place. But at this point, I think that's poised to change. So it's hard to give a number really in terms of that, but I'm anticipating that's.
Well, to Rob's point, maybe we could do a little pilot project which involves USU and Workforce Services to help build supply of people put away, and then add to it a little way to create demand that you want to see if we can attract the kinds of jobs. Medical transcription is a great example of being able to do things remotely. I was involved in helping fund a company that did certain types of transcriptions for salespeople, so they could not have to sit down and fill out their Salesforce application. They could do it over the phone. And they have rural people. There's a number of companies that have those kinds of things. And if we could target a couple of those and work from a financial standpoint, it may even be a local company we could do this with, and see what kind of resources, and really sort of chart that out so that there is a plan and a place and we can actually make it work. That might be a good way to drop some money in to start a job, for lack of a better term, remote recruiting program.
Right.
And so I think it sounds like to me that there's some pieces there that you could cobble together for, 10 or 25 or however much money you wanted to do that kind of a demonstration project. And you could do that, as Rob has indicated, to then say, okay, we need more money. It seems to be working, or it didn't work, whatever the case, but for the $600,000. And that sounds like a partnership that maybe could be put together.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Brett. I think it seems like we have some resources and programs already established in our community that we can take advantage of, but it's really that placement of the demand. If we can get some commitments from maybe some companies out there or the private sector that would take, we'll take a full-time employee if they're able to do medical transcriptions like you're saying. I think that's a great idea. But so I think it goes back to Zachariah, is that I think there's that initial staff time it's going to take to organize all of these things.
Yeah, to organize it and put the glue together to make it work, because as you know, they're disparate pieces and they need somebody to follow it through, to pick to look at what would be the best training things to do with the population that we have down there. No, I think that'd work.
So I want to throw out real quick too. I just want like Kelly to know and stuff like that. So if there is a need for a particular kind of training that we don't have, we can get it, right? So if, we're here to support what the group decides, if what type of industry there might be and what kinds of certifications would be required for that, let us know and we can go to legislature and get that.
And actually, I want to make it really clear that it's not a failing on the part of USU. Our programming supports 2-year programs, and so that there's a limitation there. And so CTE programming gets people through the door within our legislative limit, and that's a state legislature thing that we can only support 2 years. So that CTE programming is huge in terms of opening that up. And I think it sounds like there's some real great flexibility to figure out what the demand is and build that programming locally. It's a really big deal for us, and I think for the community.
Also,
flexibility
to a degree, and then we could have scholarships to keep them going. There's a lot of things we can do.
So yeah, I think if you need to have things change so you can have more flexibility because of an opportunity that makes sense, I think we need to, this group needs to push that, right? And the economic development director, there needs to be the money to push those kinds of things if you need them. If you need a better fit, a better match. If Kelly says, geez, if we could only do this, we could make this happen. Or Leanniken says, geez, if we know that this is a kind of trick, we can make that happen. So what do you need to make it work, right? And you say, well, we don't have the power, it's our bosses. Okay, then maybe some of us go talk to the bosses and get things changed. I think that
can I take a stab at moving this conversation forward and share with you, you know, we don't have to, well, let me just go ahead and do this. I'm going to share with you my screen. And this is an attempt to just translate our conversation into some funding amounts and start thinking about boxes and projects. And my hope is that, you know, we can start to see how these various ideas get prioritized when it comes to a budget. And that's the reality, is that budgets reflect priorities. So we need them to align with what this group says is its priorities as an advisory body. So this is just a first stab. We don't have to get too sucked into this, but I want to just kind of, this is what I think the conversation is reflecting. But go ahead, Rob.
Well, it looks like you're missing the childcare.
So, so I've got that in, in this new business, and this entrepreneurship. I'll just spell it out there.
Yeah, I mean,
but that's what I was thinking, was like, you know, and we can call it out more specifically if the group wants, but I had it in mind that it would just be in a pot of money intended to stimulate new business development.
Yeah, I think it's sort of, it's not necessarily what everyone would think of as new business development spending. So maybe you don't want to call it out, but I think it seems like it's a big priority for the community. I keep hearing about it. So I think then it should be probably called out and given its own separate amount. And I think we'd be subsidizing existing and new childcare providers, encouraging new ones to start up and encouraging existing ones to expand, and supporting, by making that more attractive, by giving them, more money, to do the thing or whatever they need. My other thoughts on this total thing is the co-working space item. So one, I don't think we can put money to something unless we can actually do something with it. So unless we can actually build a co-working space for that, which, we obviously can set a budget and make something happen. I think that it shouldn't be included. One of my thoughts on the co-working space, or questions for you, Zachariah, and maybe someone at the city too, would be, maybe there's extra office space. All we need is a room with internet, and that's all you need for a co-working space. Like, you can put some snacks in there, but they need internet and a place to sit down and work. Ideally, a place with enough desks where people can maybe leave some stuff at, but maybe there's a big empty conference room or two. And then if we start out with something small and that grows, then we can, show that there's a need for it. But I bet it might take a little while to get used. But even just something like that, to say, hey, if you want anyone wants free office space, sort of thing, on some level, we can offer it to you. And I think that we could even pay the city or pay the county for that space, on a per year basis. And that would, and I'm sure you guys would be all for renting out a room, right, for 25 grand a year or 50 grand a year or something like that. And then you'd have all the bathrooms all squared away and all the other resources they could use.
Yeah. Zachariah, let me add on to what Robert has said. I've had more experience in co-working spaces than anybody should ever have. And starting with one of the very first ones that was ever created in the country. And there's a real problem currently with co-working spaces. As you know, WeWork has been in big trouble before COVID. And I can tell you right now that the kiln, the salt mine, Church and State, Impact Hub, all the ones that are out there are dying because of COVID, because they can't keep them clean. They can't meet the COVID requirements. It's a real problem. They were having trouble filling them anyway in terms of a problem. So co-working spaces, and the other thing is that even the county has sat down to look at saying, well, why don't we just use our libraries and turn parts of our libraries into co-working spaces? Geez, we have libraries all over the county, and we have internet service, and we have restrooms, and we have, you know, this, that, and the other. And maybe we can do some sort of a thing where somebody can subscribe and they can come in and use rooms. And for $25 a month, they get so much room space to be able to use, or a conference room they can use, a production room they can use. But I really think that co-working spaces are going to be a hard sell in the very near future. And I would anticipate that the state of Utah is going to pull off that grant for co-working spaces. I think they work better in rural areas than they do in urban areas. And I think that, to Rob's point, put some money aside. You don't need a lot. Maybe it's $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 to form partnerships, to find a partnership space where you can do a co-working and you can put those things together. So you can test it, you can try it, you can see how many people you had, and you don't have to worry about this COVID thing. I mean, I'm telling you, in Salt Lake, you go to a place like the Kiln and you get not even a desk size space. It's a very small desk size space. And you get it for like $300 a month. Well, you have somebody right next to you that's not 6 feet apart. You have somebody across from you that's not 6 feet apart. And now those places are vacant. It's a nightmare. They look really cool and it's really fun, but they have not been able to fill up. They have not been able to turn a profit. And it's a real estate business model that you have to really run it as such. If you take out the real estate component and don't run it as a real estate deal, they'll never make any money. Regency, which is one of the original co-working spaces, which is called shared office space, that's the old term, is surviving because of how they've set things up. Industrious is having a hard time, but they're a little more traditional in how they're set up. But I'm telling you, WeWork and Kiln and all these places are just dying. And I think it's going to get through to the state of Utah not to fund co-working spaces per se. As I said, I think you have to put a little bit of money and you can say, we're going to do this to build our partnership, to build an experimental thing to see if there are enough entrepreneurs, enough demand. What really do they need? Survey that as they come in and use it. Do they need more production space? Then they need office space, etc. Right? You can be flexible, have a flexible space. Maybe you can get it out of the library or the art center or the government building, the aquatic center space over there, whatever, to do that. But I think you could do that for, less than $25,000 and take 50 and put it into one of these other initiatives that we think may need some more money.
That's a great point. That's a great point, Brad. Great point.
I think that I actually disagree with a few points that Brad's making. I also would like to explain a little bit more about why Wabi Sabi is in partnership with the co-working space. I think that's a fair point that co-working spaces are struggling right now, but a lot of businesses are struggling. I think that right now, the world is actually discovering how many people want to work remotely. And I think that when we talk about, bringing remote jobs to Moab, one, we're going to need a place for them to go. I can only speak for the city, but I don't think that the city has space for that. And I don't know that that would be something that the city would put a lot of energy toward. I can't speak for the county's facilities, but, I think that short term, yes, these kinds of businesses are struggling, but I think long term, we're going to start to see a lot more remote working spaces. And I think that part of the reason why these types of businesses like WeWork, Kiln, all those spaces are failing is because they're not diversified in what they offer. And so to talk about Wabi Sabi coming into this conversation, part of the reason why they're included is because they are a resource center specifically for our nonprofits, but they are, you know, accessed by so many people in the community. I think that it makes more sense for a co-working space to be not in a public facility, you know, not to be in a public building, and rather to be in a place like Wabi Sabi. Wabi is primarily funded through their thrift store, and so there's less of a risk for the co-working space to fail with that business than if it were through another agency. They've been partnering for a few years with USU to fund the Foundation Center, which is a grant database. And so, you know, there's possibility to bring all of those resources into this co-working space. So, I mean, I really support Wabi Sabi's, you know, Wabi Sabi and the county partnering on co-working space, and I would hesitate to take away that funding, because I think if we are really serious about wanting to bring people here to work remotely, and these are high-paying jobs, people aren't going to want to sit in a library. They're going to want to sit in a nicer space. And on top of that, when we're talking about co-working space, I think that in this community, there's a huge need not just for computer desk space, but also for maker space. We have a lot of small businesses that are working out of bedrooms and houses because they can't afford office space. And there's a huge need for community kitchens, for maker spaces, for you know, community facilities beyond just a desk space. So, so I would argue against. I respect your opinions, Brad, but I disagree with a few of them.
And I understand that, and that's fine. It's still just it's a money game, right? I mean, you got to have space. You got to have. I would say what you ought to do is check for demand, find out what that demand's going to be, so that you can see what kind of space you're going to have. See what kind of problems COVID is going to cause in terms of how much space you need, what you have to do, because all of a sudden the maintenance of these spaces have gone up dramatically. I mean, I've got friends in the cleaning business, right, that clean office buildings. And, you know, they used to clean once a week, once a night. Now, whatever it is, it's gone up 3 or 4 times. And so costs have gone up dramatically. And to keep it going and keep it working, it has to have a business model that makes sense. If it just lives on donations, it will die. And one of the things you want to do is you don't want to compete with your fellow business people in the community by subsidizing somebody in a business where somebody who's already doing the business isn't being subsidized. And that creates hate and discontent in the community. The co-working space has worked in the tech community because it's a different beast. If they go, they get up, they move out, and they go out and play. You're not competing against people per se that are in the same exact space that you're in, the same exact industry you're in or service.
Okay, so I don't mean to cut you off there, Brad, but I want to bring us back or zoom out a little bit. So we've got one conversation going around co-working space as being a desirable / viable / preferred investment category for this work. I want to, some of you have probably observed that I'm taking notes and adding some content into this table as we talk and as the conversation evolves. I think this is all really good. I want to make sure that others who have not been as vocal are contributing. I think there's a lot of wisdom with Dane and with Elaine Gisler. Lonnie, you haven't spoken yet, but other ideas for really important priorities. Lacey as well. So
I would like to just bring to the point here that my concern with this conversation that we're having is to just nominate one business to give these funds to, I think will be potentially perceived poorly in the community. I think if these funds are available, it needs to be brought out to an open application in sorts.
Okay.
Because
I think that's a good general comment, is that money that goes to.
If we just
Oh.
Yeah, if we just choose to give Wabi Sabi a $300,000 remodel, that has significantly improved their situation that a lot of other businesses would probably appreciate themselves just by adding this co-work space. So I would steer away from just nominating someone and make it into more of a formal application.
Okay. That's a great point.
So that was going to be my point too. And I was going to just bring out that maybe the money, you know, rather than just paying for somebody to have a remodel, could be used more to incentivize co-working spaces if that's what we want throughout the private industry. Like Lonnie said, I think that there's a lot of businesses and developers. I mean, I've heard a lot of discussion anyway about building buildings that could be used for that, office space rental. You know, that's a private, something that private industry could definitely take care of. And if we're using grant money to incentivize that, then yeah, it should be public to anyone that wants to be able to use, to take advantage of those incentives.
Okay, so I'm just going to put a general note that any money that goes to individual organizations should really be determined and dispersed through a competitive process. I think that's a great comment, and you all know how much sort of insular fighting exists in our business community. So good point and well taken. Dane and Elaine.
Is that right? Can I say something real quick? In your notes, was there could we add a line item for the secondary industry that you had identified as arts and I think it was arts and entertainment?
Mm-hmm. Arts and culture.
Yeah, arts and culture. I think the reason I bring this up is that the Utah State Commission spends millions and millions of dollars attracting film productions and different types of art festivals and things like that to different areas within the state. There's a lot of funds that could be potentially appropriated to highlight Moab. So just something to potentially add.
Yeah, what I'd like to add with regards to the whole co-working space is that if we had a couple of million, it'd be a whole different ballgame. I kind of envision, a lot of high-tech workers are used to working at home, but they also like to congregate. And I kind of would envision some kind of condominium development where you have living spaces that these workers rent, and there's a revenue stream there. And then you have conference rooms, in that community, and maybe it's, 3 buildings with 6 apartments, and maybe some of this money should be spent to go after some of the high-tech companies from Silicon Valley to Utah County to, all over the nation to see if they would entertain sending a team of workers to Moab for, maybe a year, 6 months, something like that. And the revenue could be generated through the rent of the space that this whole co-working space is providing.
I think that's a great point, Dane, and one that I have brought up to, I think, you as well as other individuals that, one of the strategies or tactics rather that I'm really excited about in terms of attracting context specific or context appropriate subunits of larger businesses is by trying to incentivize and encourage these companies to bring a team of individuals down for a year-long, call it a sabbatical, call it a focused or special projects, team exercise, and having space for those individuals to live and work as you've described. So thank you for bringing that up. I'll add it to the list, and then I want to make sure that we get some feedback from Elaine as well. With just a specific focus on tourism. I'll come back to you, Rob.
Oh, yeah.
Elaine, are you still with us? If you are, you're on mute. It looks like maybe she dropped off. So, Rob, let's come back to you.
Just under the subject of like supporting entrepreneurship, one idea I just thought of, which might not be a great idea, but maybe it is, like, commercial real estate is hard to come by in town. It'd be pretty sweet if maybe through Gain you had, like, call it like one space that was kind of like a rotating, almost like business gallery kind of thing, where you could have a few different businesses there and they could start selling their products on Main Street, or sort of. A space would probably cost, $2 a square foot or something a month. So, like, theoretically, you could have like 1,000 square foot place, and have it cost, 25 grand a year. So that would be like in a budget, and that'd be a pretty awesome resource for the community if we had it. It obviously would be hard to find that space, but maybe someone in town, would be, maybe it could be a donation there. I don't know, just a thought, like wish list sort of thing. Not as practical, but I mean, financially it could work if the right space opened up, but we'd run into the same issue everybody else has, which is hard to find those.
So just to keep in mind too, if this is something where we could combine education into this with, innovation and entrepreneurship and things like that, I mean, this would be long-term, not long-term, but it would require some planning and organization, but we have land.
True.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
So, then also I'd like to just, we had a longer discussion earlier here. We were talking about, USU and things like that, what they're doing. And I think, I love the idea of supporting what's already kind of happening and kind of amplifying it, as opposed to starting new things, which is like way, way, way harder. So yeah, I just texted Leanna, and she just said that the financial aid is a big issue, because I mean, the costs are pretty low for, relative to college in general. But I think if we could putting money to having scholarships and so forth, I think that seems like a great way to spend some money. Obviously not scholarships for someone to get a degree, and I'm not going to name a degree to offend anybody, but something that's like maybe less, business relevant, but someone that will likely stay in the community and so forth. I think a few $1,000s can go a long way to letting that person, move their life forward. And we already have a good person to give it to with USU Moab. And
we also have had a lot of conversations about, so financial support is one thing. And then also we have, a lot of first generation students that don't have a lot of support. And we've talked a lot about, Emily actually came up with the idea originally, is to have a cohort of high school students that we support. And that's above and beyond even tuition. And so we could have support for cohorts to help them get through with support them with the study skills that they need. And, sort of a lot like what are some of the things that Kelly's group does to try to get folks into their jobs, is to support them through, and have them have a job at the end. So all of this stuff can all really coalesce as we move forward.
Yeah, my perspective, and I may be off, but my perspective is that if people really want the education, there's likely sources to pay for that. And so I think maybe money and scholarships would hit a small group of people maybe, but I think that there's probably funding available if we have, I think it's the demand that really is missing. That's my perspective.
Yeah, and we do have actually quite a few scholarships, and we're able to support a lot of our students.
Well,
But there's stuff
why don't
beyond.
why don't we just put some money to it, see how it goes, and then we can always expand it. But I think just sounds like, Leanna, you would like more financial support if you could have it. Let's do it. Let's consider it. I mean, yeah, just a little bit. Start with.
So, it looks like maybe Elaine rejoined the conversation via phone. Elaine, if you are with us, it looks like your phone is on mute, but we were trying to call on you for any tourism specific perspectives. I also want to be conscious of everyone's time. It's 1:30 right now. I think it's clear to me that we still have a lot of work to do in finalizing our funding request for this Part A funding. So my suggestion, and we need a motion to do this, given that we haven't fully completed the agenda. We're still very much in the discussion, but my recommendation is that we push pause for today, and our homework for next week be to review this table that I've started to put together with a lot of the notes from our conversation today, in that we come back a week from today, same time, same place, and really dig into this budget effectively, because that is ultimately what our priorities are and what our recommended priorities are. So I think it's fine to keep the numbers at somewhat of a high level in terms of boxes, but the more specific we can get, the better. And then I'll just note that I have been adding notes into these boxes. For example, the administration amount, that's got a lot of question marks around it. And it's a big cost when you think about staffing that position. But, everything else we've talked about requires a lot of time and effort and energy and just sustained focus from an individual. And so, let's just keep that in mind. Projects take people. So is there any opposition to that approach? And if not, could someone make a motion that we adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Okay. Brad has motion to adjourn. Liana, is that a second? Okay. Any discussion? Anybody want to add anything to what I've suggested?
Maybe one thing we could do, Zachariah, is we could all have a column where we put the dollar figures we think is a good idea.
Yeah.
And then we could average those and get a sense for what people priorities.
Yeah. So
maybe a column for each of us to put in our own ideas.
Well, rather than creating that for you, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this Google Drive document with you, and you can go in and add your own columns, so that if folks don't do it, then there isn't a column there.
Fine. That'd be great.
Okay, so.
Yeah, I think we're almost done, it seems like. I mean, in terms of I feel like we've got a lot of stuff here, certainly. And it sounds like we don't have to spell everything out that we do and do it exactly the way we do it.
No, there's also opportunity to modify as needed. So. Okay, great. Well, with that said, can I have a vote on the motion to adjourn? Okay, anyone opposed? Okay, well, great. So Rob, you will hopefully work on the minutes, and get those out to the group, and then they can be reviewed and approved, reviewed ahead of the next meeting and approved quickly.
Yeah, I kind of just went high level, and I feel like
It's fine.
I don't have too much stuff. And I think, well, we can include your, maybe I can include this draft application in there as well. I don't know if that makes sense,
Yeah, that's fine.
but yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for your sustained focus in today's conversation. I think we're starting to make some forward progress, and you know, even once we get this application submitted, the work doesn't end there. There's a lot of opportunity here for us to you know, really improve the focus of our economic development efforts. So.
Well, Zachariah, thank you for all your help and all your good work. We're glad that you can still stay with us, that you're not moving away, and on to bigger and better things. And so we appreciate all your help in putting this together and getting it done.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
We're gonna miss you.
Thanks, Dane. I'm not going to be gone forever, and I'm not going anywhere. So
Sounds pretty exciting.
yeah, it's